in like September of 22, they basically made a company-wide pivot to go hard into AI. And so it was kind of risky. In hindsight, it's kind of obvious, but at the time it was still, kind of new. And so they really went hard into AI, and they pretty quickly partnered with Stable Diffusion and had like a image generation plugin that was very popular. But it worked, and so actually, Canva had, like a lot of people, there was a bit of a growth jump, in 2020 with the pandemic, but things had kind of slowed down a little bit. But then with AI, it really helped to accelerate growth.
Welcome to Software Snack Bites. I'm Shomik Ghosh of Boltzart Ventures, and today we're excited to have Sandy Kory on the pod. Sandy is a GP at HorizonVC, which focuses on investing in early stage companies. And in this episode, we're diving into Canva, covering the company story from end to end, of which Sandy was an early investor in. So Sandy, let's just jump right in. What does Canva do, and kind of talk a little bit about the founding story?
Yeah, and thanks for having me. So Canva is a provider of online design software. The mission of the company is to just democratize design and let anyone, even a schlub like me, be a designer. And to really get to know the company today, I think it's important to understand the backstory. And by the way, today, the company is over $2 billion in ARR, growing 50-60%. Quite profitable. I would say besides OpenAI, there's no company on the planet that has its scale and its growth. And by the way, it's also accelerated in its growth in the past few years, which is also kind of bananas. And so it's just an amazing growth juggernaut. And so it dates back to Perth, Australia, which is the kind of the west coast of Australia. And Melanie Perkins, who's still the CEO. So she was interested in design very early, and learned tools like Photoshop. When she was in high school, in university, she actually taught Photoshop to other students, and she was just frustrated with how hard it was to use. And she had this insight that it should be easier to make designs. There should be back then it was more of a downloadable software. And her insight was, it should be online, it should be easy to use. It should be collaborative. And so in 2007, she, along with her boyfriend at the time, Cliff, started a design software company called Fusion Books. So she had the insight to make this kind of end-to-end design suite, but wanted to start smaller. And so they targeted the niche of high school yearbooks. And so they became the leading provider of software to Australian high school yearbooks. And so Fusion Books was, they were kind of running it out of like their parents' basement when they were still doing university, and it was bootstrapped, but it was a success. But they still had this aspiration to build like a bigger company with a more ambitious product. And so then kind of fast forward to late 2011, a guy named Bill Tai, who was kind of a retired VC and angel investor. He was in Perth because there was a kite surfing tournament there. I think it's a really, real hot spot for kite surfing. Okay. And, Mel basically kind of approached him and said, hey, started pitching the idea for Canva. And apparently he said to her, okay, this is kind of interesting, but let me get back to these other things. If you're ever in SF, I'll have lunch with you. And so then, a few months later in 2012, she reached out to him and said, hey, I'm going to be in SF. Will you have lunch with me? Apparently, the only thing she was there to do was to
do that. Yeah, right.
It was one of those, but just a great example of her kind of courage and determination. And so Cliff is running the Fusion Books business. She goes to SF to meet Bill Tai and trying to meet other investors. And then Bill, I guess he was impressed by Melanie and Cliff and the vision, but said, you guys need a technical co-founder. And he said, if you can find a good technical co-founder, I'll invest. And so he then introduced them to a guy named Lars Rasmussen, who was an early Google engineer and had been in Australia, and introduced Lars as a kind of technical advisor to help them find a good technical co-founder. And so they actually ended up talking to a lot of people and found Cameron Adams, who also was convex to Google. He had been involved in like Google Wave, which is a product that was built in the Australian team. at Google back in the day. And so they got a really good technical founder, and then Bill and I invested. And then, Mel just, pitched over 200 VCs actually. And so got a lot of notes. So she was just, so determined that by early 2013, they had put together a proper seed round, about $1.5 million. Blackbird Ventures was the biggest investor. And then, they actually had a closed beta for the product for a while. There's an interesting tension, in kind of startup advice land of, iterate rapidly, like, ship the product even if it's not good, or maybe the Steve Jobs school of like everything must be perfect. And I think both approaches can work. And with Canva, they definitely more took the approach of every detail must be perfect before we launch. And so they did the public launch in August of 2013, and it got pretty good traction, pretty good kind of word of mouth. They, at the same time, they had a monetization model that didn't really take off. But probably the killer early use case was allowing you to easily make social media designs like in Canva that then you could export to like other platforms. And so back then it was really tedious if you made a design, for each platform. And so you could kind of do it just in Canva. And so they really leveraged kind of the growth of social media at the time. And the company certainly has had a few hiccups along the way, but it's kind of been up and to the right since then.
Okay, so there's a lot of things. One, did they formally shut down Fusion Books along the way or something? Like, was that business actually working? Or
yeah, it was working. They expanded into New Zealand, and they created a new entity for Canva. And honestly, I don't know what exactly happened with that. But there are a lot of high school yearbook, clubs, I think, that depend on that software. So
that is wild.
Canva has over 60 million kind of student and educator users today. So they probably, took care of those Fusion Books users.
That is, I would not have expected it to come from, yearbook software, but also I'm just curious. Like, me and you have known each other for a long time, right? And at that time you were running Horizon Partners, like the investment bank, and so like, how'd you end up meeting the Canva team?
Yeah, well, very good fortune. I was always interested in angel investing. I was, fortunate to invest as an angel in an early Palantir round in 2009. I knew a guy named Nicky Shavak who's in the Bay Area, and then he went back to Sydney and he started StartMate as a startup accelerator that was really important for the Australian ecosystem. And I was able to invest as an angel in a few companies from StartMate. So angel investing was kind of a side hustle for me. And then from StartMate, they started Blackbird Ventures, which I think has safe to say become kind of the best venture firm in Australia. In fact, up until the recent round, Blackbird actually owned 15% of Canva. And so just amazing kind of doubling down, tripling down over the years. And so from StartMate came Blackbird Ventures, and I became an LP in that Blackbird Fund 1. And boy, what a fun for the ages. And I mean, now if Blackbird wants to invest in something, there's going to be a line around the block of people who want to co-invest. But back then it was, a little bit unknown. Yeah. And so they would make an investment and then they would say to LPs, hey, here's an opportunity. And so in early 2014, they sent an email out saying, hey, there's a co-investment opportunity in Canva. And so I raised my hand and was able to meet Melanie over Skype. And, I was impressed, there was good traction, and Melanie was, really compelling. And, so I was able to invest as an angel, and, it's just been an amazing ride.
A really cool story about even just Blackbird, because, you always hear about them as the earliest investor in Canva and stuff, but you don't, or at least there's not much press around them. I think it's starting to now, but really interesting. So, you talked about that 2 billion ARR, I think growing, 50, 60%, whatever, and close to, or actually cash flow positive. But kind of talk a little bit more. I mean, it's not a high ACV product, right? It's a long tail of customers. So maybe talk a little bit about, in terms of that scale, is that mostly coming from long tail of customers? Is it now starting to be more kind of enterprise motion? Just kind of curious what that looks like.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's probably important to note that the company, even at this scale, is still very, product led, and kind of the organization, the most influential people are not salespeople, which at software companies as they scale, usually kind of the revenue team becomes pretty influential. Canva didn't have any salespeople until north of 100 million in revenue. And so now the kind of enterprise business, is growing, faster than kind of the consumer business. But the enterprise business has a relatively low price point compared to other expensive enterprise, tools. So it still very much is the ethos of democratizing design. So I believe there's some numbers that were released, that said the enterprise business is growing like 65% year over year. And so that is really taking off. And now there is some sales there, but it's still very much kind of bottom up and product led.
So is the right way to think about it that before them, everyone was using Adobe and all the other solutions that were out there, and it was very like you had to pay a high license fee or recurring software fee later on, but you had to pay this high fee, and that's the only way you did it. And now, like, they kind of just open up the market for everyone. Like I've used it. The Software Snack Bites logo comes from Canva. Like I'm not a designer at all. I don't know how to do anything. So is that kind of the main story here of like they truly opened up this access and then created this new market?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a great TAM expansion story, right? And so as a seed investor, I don't actually think TAM is that important because a great product like Canva can massively expand the market. And by the way, Adobe has done just fine. Yeah. In fact, in the past 10 years since Canva launched, Adobe's market cap is up 10x. And by the way, Figma has also kind of come out of the woodwork and is an amazing company. And so if you'd gone back in time 10 years and said, hey, Canva is going to be amazingly successful, it's like, well, okay, sorry, Adobe must be struggling and no way other startups are going to succeed. But in fact, there's just been a rising tide. And I mean, I think Canva is taking share right now, so maybe it's doing better than some of its peers, but it's still a market that has grown. And yeah, they've had a huge part in terms of really democratizing design and expanding that market.
Let's go back to where Canva started. Like, kind of what was the core product that it started with? And I guess was there a specific type of design or a specific type of use case that like was the core thing that they were working on?
I think it was social media. That was probably the most important, but it was always meant to be a versatile tool that you could use for, wedding invitations and, all sorts of brochures. They pretty early on added print. So, with like one button, you could get the design printed. They had kind of a network of, printers that they partnered with. So it's always been pretty broad, but I would say that social media, just here we are in kind of this modern moment, social media, our social media presences are important. And so that's probably been the biggest driver. And so, yeah, that hey, make it, really easy to design, to make designs that you can use kind of across different social media platforms in one place. I think that was kind of, critical. And then maybe the other early, important product breakthrough was just around images, where when they launched, they had, licensed some images. The initial kind of business model was, free software, and then some images were free, and then some were paid. And, their early monetization wasn't that impressive, but, they had a lot of happy users. And so based on happy users, they ended up kind of revising, like, what's the right approach to, really productize this and build a business. And I think it's a good insight for founders where, you want to have an early hypothesis of how people are going to, pay me for a product. But once you have 10,000 happy users or 100 happy customers, you're going to get a lot smarter about the things that they're actually going to pay for. And so for Canva, in 2014, they launched like a pro tier that included like a much bigger set of images, and they were able to get licensing deals so that they didn't have to pay. So some of their images were their own, but a lot of them were from people like Getty, and so they didn't have to pay Getty an exorbitant kind of per image, and instead they could offer this. I think it was like $12 a month, and you had as much of the images as you wanted. And so that was a really important driver for usage and then for monetization in particular.
Yeah, and I'm guessing now over the years, like there's so much now user-generated content that that portion of Getty stuff is probably way down because it's just now coming from the users. That's right.
Yeah, and then they bought a couple companies actually in this space, Pexels and Pixabay, back in I believe 2020. And so then those were like user-generated, software sites.
Oh, okay.
And so they bought those and then got access to those. And I think those still are running and still growing in terms of their image catalog. So yeah, at this point, Canva has, I don't think they have much of a dependency on any third-party image provider.
So we talked about that start with kind of social media type use cases and things like that. But when you think about today now, right, 2 billion ARR, growing really rapidly, like what's the most popular land use cases today for their product suite?
I think there's a couple. I think, and this is kind of anecdotal, but my sense is that for consumers, the AI features are probably quite attractive and kind of headline grabbing. And so I think on the enterprise side, it's a little different. Maybe I'll circle back to that in a moment. But Canva, I think also has done a really good job with AI. In like September of 22, they basically made a company-wide pivot to go hard into AI. And so it was kind of risky. In hindsight, it's kind of obvious, but at the time it was still, kind of new. And so they really went hard into AI, and they pretty quickly partnered with Stable Diffusion and had like a image generation plugin that was very popular. But it worked, and so actually, Canva had, like a lot of people, there was a bit of a growth jump, in 2020 with the pandemic. But things had kind of slowed down a little bit. But then with AI, it really helped to accelerate growth. So I think that's been really important. And there's a lot of startups and other companies that have AI, but I think Canva's AI suite is probably as good as anyone, if not better. And then on the enterprise side, I think AI might be useful, but I know there are concerns about the guardrails. There's concerns about if I'm an enterprise and I'm using AI for creating an image, like am I going to get sued by the creator at some point? But so I think Canva actually has done I think a really good job of having guardrails in the AI, and then also announcing initiatives where they will collaborate with kind of creators to make sure that they get kind of a fair compensation. So it's like, I think the AI is less of a driver for the enterprise, but they've got it, and they've done it in a way that's very compliant. So then on the enterprise side, I think it's actually just the democratizing design across the organization, and then it's having kind of the traditional security features that you'll want, and then things like brand kits for compliance. Yep. So a good example is Salesforce, I think, has over 170 social media accounts across 22 regions and over 20 languages. And, it's important when you're a big company that individuals aren't just winging it with, content that's like off brand and maybe not compliant. Right. And so it's really important to have that, have some compliance and have some standards. At the same time, today you have a lot of employees are capable of creating designs. So Salesforce uses Canva so that they can democratize design creation across the organization, but also make sure that the brand standards are upheld and there's compliance and so forth. So
now it when you look at the website, at least, like there's all these modules. Like when you open it up and you'll see these different things. So it's clear that of course there's the AI things that we just talked about. There's all these sort of things, but I've noticed there's like kind of almost like a productivity suite. There's other things as well. So, kind of maybe talk about where the platform has expanded to, what are the kind of maybe high level major components, and how you think about, now Canva as a platform.
Yeah, well, they've definitely expanded. And I think that, Canva probably, gets compared more often to Adobe, but I think they probably think of their product suite as more, closer to Office in terms of, kind of wider ranging functionality. And so Canva has definitely expanded its functionality over the years. They've also been pretty, I think, pretty savvy with M&A. And so they bought product teams that have helped them to have additional features. So, I mentioned that, they bought Pexels and Pixabay for kind of more images. They bought a company called Flourish out of the UK for enhanced data visualization features. They bought a company called Zdings. That was actually their first acquisition, that had, it was kind of a lightweight online PowerPoint competitor. And so that enhanced their presentations features. Then they bought a company called Kaleidoscope in 2021. Kaleidoscope had built a really popular background removal tool, so early AI. And so they bought that and then strengthened their AI capability and also enabled them to have that kind of background, removing the background, changing the background feature. So they've kind of expanded. And so I don't think they're trying to Office, Microsoft Office, but besides just kind of the core design functionality, they've got presentations, they've got Write, they've got visualization, and then now they have the Magic Studio, which has the range of AI features.
That's pretty interesting. You mentioned kind of the M&A side of things. At least from my sense, I may not know, but like those companies are not necessarily like the largest companies in the world, right? Like at Canva size, you could buy a lot of companies out there. Does it seem like their strategy has been more so, hey, we have to solve, or we would like to solve this specific area, or we'd like to grow into this, and so let's find like a great team that aligns with our culture, but like on the smaller side that we can just plug in the tech folks and have that scale? Like how do you kind of think about their M&A strategy?
Yeah, and I think that's a good approximation. I mean, I think it's important to appreciate that they have a really strong and unique culture, and so they're very careful. So they've never bought, any startup that's raised a lot of venture capital. I mean, nothing wrong with that. They've never, from what I can tell, they've never gotten into like a bidding war for any hot company or anything like that. So I think they have very strong internal capabilities. So it's not a company, that relies on buying other businesses to keep the growth going and keep the innovation going. But I think it's about finding kind of small teams that are really good, that basically have a product that can contribute to a really important feature. And so it's interesting, like the companies they've bought have all been bootstrapped or just raised a little bit of capital and have been cash flow positive. They've bought a bunch of companies in Europe. And then the way they go about things is also interesting. As a former M&A guy, like they move like very fast and very decisively, and they don't kind of mess around. And so like their most recent acquisition, they bought this company called Affinity out of the UK. It's their biggest acquisition too. Like the story that has been kind of reported is they reached out. Cameron Adams, actually, the CTO and co-founder, reached out to the company over email or DM, and I think they had bought the business within a month. They flew out almost immediately, and they just were very good to deal with, and kind of sold them on the vision. I think their record of buying companies is a good one, where the existing products are supported, teams are supported, and so it's worked out well. I mean, it's not quite as an aggressive M&A strategy as maybe Google had in early days, but I think for Canva, it's worked really well.
When you think about the personas that use Canva, I mean, is it truly just, anybody? Like, how do you kind of think about it?
For small businesses, yeah, like absolutely. And for individuals, like absolutely it's everyone. I think when you get to like bigger companies where there's silos, you might find pockets of resistance. Like if you go to the Reddit, Photoshop, subreddit, like the Adobe power users, they don't always like, it's like, who are these people? Everyone's designing. This is what we do. So you get that, right? And maybe there's a little bit of that with like Figma, with like product and engineering, like where maybe they're more partial to Figma. So it's interesting, but I think that it typically starts out, with marketing, maybe sales, where you get some organic users, and then but then it can really spread widely. There was a good interview I read of like from a former Reddit VP in the marketing organization, and he kind of talked about the process where they were kind of looking to scale kind of design tooling across the organization, because they worked with a bunch of like freelancers and agencies, and it was kind of too cumbersome. And Canva like had already had substantial just bottom up adoption in marketing and sales. They were getting calls from Adobe, so they did consider a competitor. But Canva had just such strong goodwill, because it was just so easy to use. That it was kind of an easy choice. And then now Canva does have a sales, functionality. And so they engaged them and found them kind of pretty collaborative. And then Reddit has seen, kind of major expansion. And so, for example, like in the finance team, they use, there's a bunch of Canva users, and they've used Canva for designs, for the IPO roadshow and other, kind of investor relations.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Right. Yeah. There's a lot of use cases you wouldn't think about, but then when you mention it, it's like, yeah, you still got to put the board deck together, or the the quarterly call deck or whatever. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. Let's move into what I like to call the more galaxy brained section, which is the TAM, right? The market, the TAM, all of that. So I always say this, like the TAM's probably wrong, but like at the very least, like let's just talk about, how do you get to some sort of TAM estimate for Canva?
It's a good question. And so I made a comment before, as a seed stage investor, I think TAM is pretty overrated. I think it's reasonable if you're investing in a company, at a late stage like Canva. I think it's reasonable to think about TAM, right? Like, okay, the $2 billion in revenue, but it's going to have to get bigger, and so let's think about the TAM. So it's a good question. So look, they have, at year end, they had 170 million monthly active users, probably at 200 at this point. They had, I believe, about 20 million paying users.
Wow.
So there's just a question there of, probably a lot of those free users can become paying users. They also have 60 million users in kind of that are free, that are students and teachers, and a lot of those can grow. So you can kind of probably just look at that and think, this thing can probably, drive paying users up. Although I would mention something that's unappreciated about the company, which is that for the company, up until a couple of years ago, the company's revenue growth had been entirely correlated with user and usage growth. So they didn't grow by squeezing more revenue out of users like a lot of companies. It was always based on
it was seat-based, yeah.
Yeah, well, and just engagement and value. And so I think they're still very early at like the revenue engine and figuring out the ways to get the most. Versus like more mature companies, the Salesforces, the Microsofts, the Adobes. I think they have like teams of highly paid scientists, who are A/B testing, how to make the font on the pay button, ideal to drive up, kind of revenue. So Canva is like in the first inning on that. So there's probably a lot of potential there. So Microsoft Office has over 1 billion users, I believe. I don't think they reported exactly anymore, but I think they have over 300 million paying users. So I think with Canva, it's a bit of a swag. I guess another thing that's interesting about Canva is it's so global. So like, I think I was just looking this up, 17% of their web traffic is from the US. And they don't disclose global distribution of paying users. But I mean, my guess would be that 25% of paying users are in the US. And then there's India, Philippines, Brazil, Mexico. So it's interesting. There's definitely some kind of global, economic dynamics there. But I guess what I would say is that, Canva at around 20 million paying users with 200 million kind of overall, it seems to me like there's a path for them to get to 100 million paying users. If you look at the numbers, it's probably about $10 a month per user. They're very early in kind of revenue optimization. So there's probably a path for them to, grow revenue per paying user by 50 to 100%. So, it's like, I think you can kind of do a back of the envelope to see how they can get from, say, 2 billion-ish right now to 20 billion in a 5-10 year time frame.
Crazy.
But yeah, I think it's hard with TAM. You kind of think, well, there's 8 billion humans. How many people are going to want design software? And I think frankly, all of them. But obviously, from a global perspective, a lot of people don't have the resources to pay. I think they do have some lower prices in some emerging markets, but there's just kind of some constraints there. But I mean, maybe one day they'll have billions of users and maybe even billions of paying users. I mean, I think the demand is there as we live in this connected age where people, especially younger people, are more and more focused on their online personas, and design just becomes mission critical to that.
Yeah. Well, I think what's important also about what you said is like, we look at 2 billion ARR, and we're like, oh, it's so big, and wow, like look at how high it is. But at the flip side is, you go look at Adobe's business, you go look at Microsoft's business, you go look at, G Suite doesn't disclose what it is, but you look at those businesses, like there's a lot of room to grow and a lot of share to take in that space. But given that, like the competitive landscape here can be quite kind of crazy when someone thinks about Canva, because we just mentioned those players, but there's also on top of Adobe and all those, like there's Miro, there's Figma, there's Wix, there's Squarespace, which is like designed for the website, like all this sort of stuff. So kind of maybe, how do you think about the competitive landscape here?
Yeah, I mean it's very competitive. It's a little bit, dependent on how you define the market. Is Microsoft Office in the same market or not? Well, PowerPoint, I think, definitely overlaps with Canva. Excel, maybe not. So there's some questions there. But yeah, I think Canva has the best product for this kind of use case of democratizing design. So I think from a competitive worry perspective, it's like, can anyone make a better product? Right now, I don't think so. I mean, right now, I think they have a compounding, product advantage. I think it's possible that an Adobe or a Microsoft might figure something out and kind of, jump ahead of them, but it seems like probably not. On the other hand, there's a lot of startups out there. Figma is a great company. It seems like Figma is more focused on kind of product engineering. And so that is a little bit overlapping, but not much with Canva. And then there's just a long list of startups. Most of them, some of them pretty well funded. I don't think any of them have really gotten, significant share. Some of them have gotten some free users and then raised a bunch of venture capital and kind of didn't make it scale. So it's a very crowded market right now. But I guess, there was a good quote from the Canva founders where, in the first 10 years of the company's history, the focus was really on the individual and enabling the individual to design. And the next 10 years, which is starting this year, the focus is more about teams and enterprises. And so that's kind of the big mission. And so I think from that perspective, there is less competition, because if you want to have 100 seats at a company, you've got to have these compliance and security things. So that's a much smaller group of competitors, and I do think Canva is most focused on that right now. And then I think you can kind of go, kind of through Adobe, Microsoft, and it's not quite as long a list, but it's also a moment of incredible AI innovation. And so there's definitely risks that startups pop up with some, twist on AI that could end up being, formidable.
Yeah. I think that makes a ton of sense. If we talk about kind of now the business model aspect, we've covered some of it a little bit, but I want to dive in a little bit more deeply here. So one, you kind of mentioned, hey, used to grow not linearly at all. Actually, it was exponentially, but you used to grow in lockstep with users. Now maybe that's in the early days of potentially changing. So just talk about, how does Canva make money? Is it seat-based? Is it usage-based? Is there some sort of platform fee where then you have a usage thing on top? Kind of what are the flavors?
Yeah, it's really simple in that it's all kind of seat-based pricing. And so they've always had a pretty beefy free plan. And that's really important and not going to change. And then they have the first tier of paid, which is $15 a month. I think it's $120 if you pay upfront. And then they have a Teams plan, which is similar, but it's basically a minimum of 3 users, and you get a few more features for collaboration and things like that. But those plans are around like $10 a month. And then the enterprise product, they don't have public pricing, and I've gotten a few disparate data points on that, but I think it's probably around $15 a month. Maybe more if you're smaller. I mean, I in this interview with the Reddit VP of marketing, he actually said that they had 50 users and they paid $6,000. It was upfront, so that was just $12, I believe, a month. Or I should say $10 a month. So it's a pretty simple seat-based model, not a lot of bells and whistles in terms of upsells and so forth. Maybe in the future, but I think their ethos is around keeping things very simple, very easy to use. So I suspect they'll still have a pretty simple pricing model, well into the future.
You mentioned that free plan is healthy, is there for the long term, right? Do you still consider that motion to be helping them today, as they obviously helping them with the long tail for sure as you get the conversion, but as they start to move more into traditional enterprise sales, do you think that free motion is still helping them?
Yeah, I think so. And I would also say that one of their underrated growth initiatives over the years has been SEO. They really took SEO seriously from the earliest days. And so they made great content. They had an amazing template library in the early days, and they made that free. And so come get a template that would be valuable. Of course, it was also a nice entryway into the product. And they were very smart about kind of the white hat SEO techniques. And so that, if you kind of look at their amazing capital efficiency over the years, very, very low user acquisition was always a big part of that. And so I think it's worked really well for them to have that, the free content and then the pretty beefy, free version of the product. And I think that it's, kind of the evidence is just that, yeah, they're seeing really nice penetration now in the enterprise. And from what I can tell, it's the Dropbox Slack model where, you're not just like cold calling some company and explaining, hey, this is what Canva is. It's like, you can tell there's 100 users at a company.
Right.
And so you reach out and they're like, oh yeah, everyone uses Canva. Let's talk.
Yeah, that makes sense. One thing you mentioned there was the template library. And do you see a world where maybe they have the creators, or maybe this is already happening, but there's paid templates that people can use, and then there's like a rev share sort of thing, and that's like another revenue stream, or maybe the team hasn't talked about that yet. But how do you kind of think about those sort of user generated paid assets?
Yeah, my guess is that they won't do that. It is an interesting opportunity. I've never talked with anyone at the company about that. I think that there have been other companies over the years that have done that, like a lot of like WordPress themes, companies like Envato, another great company from down under. But I think they've tried to keep things simple. And it's also, I think, back on kind of their pricing business model, it's a bundle strategy. And so I think they really like that. And so, yeah, can they pay a rev share, to Getty? I'm sure there's something there. And now with the AI features, I think they did announce that, kind of $300 million that they're going to commit to paying creators over the next 3 years for kind of AI, creative rights or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, so I think probably they'll stick to kind of the bundling. And when you look at the M&A strategy where they buy, features that become products, it's all about like putting more into the bundle, and usually just keeping the price the same.
Okay.
And it kind of gets back to the TAM where it's like, well, right now the TAM is, 200 million users. What if we had, this really cool, product? Well, okay, maybe now the TAM is 250, so they just keep on, keeping it, trying to have that low price point and putting kind of more and more product into that bundle.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Making it more valuable over time. And I like it. Every single time you mention it, you're like, they kind of keep it simple. And it's refreshing to hear that in a world where you have usage-based billing and you have like hybrid models and you have all this stuff. And it's just like, nope, just pay for the bundle. It works. But let's talk a little bit about the distribution side. We understand the product-led motion. We understand that there's this bottoms-up stuff, things like that. There is this direct sales business. Is there channel partners? Is there an influencer strategy? Like kind of what else is happening? You mentioned SEO, like kind of what's the components of distribution?
Yeah, I mean, I think early on it was, word of mouth and SEO. And I think that there are users who are social media power users, or, the early Canva power users, social media power users. So the word of mouth was really strong. I don't think they ever did a, deliberate influencer outreach. It's like when they were getting off the ground in 2014, 2015, I'm not even sure influencers, I'm not even sure that was a term. They did outreach for SEO. So another kind of clever and just, another example of them just being really operationally intensive. They opened a Philippines office pretty early as a company, and they had some QA, but it was mostly like support, and then also kind of SEO, kind of content creation and link building. And so they would send you a nice note saying, "Hey, Shomik, would you link to us? We've got this great content that we think your users would like." So I think that's the closest they got to like influencer outreach. Yeah, I don't even think they ever have done like affiliate deals. I think right now a lot of AI products are doing affiliate deals with influencers, and it seems reasonable. It's like I don't actually think they ever did that. So yeah, maybe we're just back to trying to keep it simple.
Yeah, I mean, it's just simplicity all over the place, and just build a good product. That's amazing. As we kind of wrap up this business model section, like everyone's always talking about moats, right? And so there's from my perspective, and maybe this is incorrect from your perspective, but I would say like, hey, like switching costs maybe aren't as big of a moat around this business, in my opinion, right? Because I could switch from this to, well, maybe not Adobe, but other solutions out there potentially. And so kind of just what do you think about the major moats around this business?
Yeah, what an interesting question. And I remember like early in my career, I read this blog post by this guy named Rich Skrenta, who he coined a term I really liked, which was zero switching costs create winner take all markets. Because this was like 20 years ago, and no one knew that Google was like the best business model ever, because Google was so secretive as a private company. And I remember people saying, "Well, Google search, I don't know, like what's going to keep people from switching away from Google?" And a good question. I thought it was a real concern, but then it was like, actually, everyone's just going to switch to Google because it's the better product. So I don't know, maybe that's a simplification, but I tend to think with Canva it's kind of similar, where as long as they have the best product, that low switching costs like works to their advantage. It's also a product that's relatively easy to cancel. There's actually some kind of Twitter influencer just had a post complimenting how Canva handled him when he wanted to cancel. Like they didn't have a dark pattern, but they just had a few prompts reminding him of like, you use this, you like this, and actually if you cancel and you come back, it will cost you a little bit more. And so he decided to stick with it, and then he tweeted about it. I was like, well done, Canva. So yeah, I think it's like when you have a really good product, I think you just want to be really transparent and easy to do business with. But no, I think their moat is, distribution. I mean, they have over 200 million monthly active users. They have this massive user base among students and educators globally. That's growing distribution advantage. The SEO, it's like you could probably try to quantify how many pages Google has indexed. But there's just this massive at this point distribution advantage. And I think data as well is a big advantage for them. So it's hard to know how things are going to go with AI from here, but I think it's safe to say that having a massive proprietary data set is going to give you an advantage. And I think they've been executing at a high level on AI. So I think that data is going to really help them. But then probably the biggest thing is it's a little bit banal because everyone says this, although it might not be true. But in Canva's case, it is. It's just team and leadership. The founders have just been remarkable. If you're kind of scoring for growth and capital efficiency, I don't know if you can find better founders, this century. And they are just incredibly good. Melanie Perkins, product vision from 15 years ago. I mean, she had a crystal ball, and it still seems to be working. And then just kind of operational rigor, this strong culture. They do a lot of things differently. Like they've been much bigger as a company on like upward promotions. And so the SaaS playbook is like, okay, you need a sales leader, like go hire someone. Like they've tended to promote people internally a lot more than kind of the norms. They have this really strong culture, really strong leadership, and so I liken them to actually another company that I invested in, Palantir, where when you have this really strong culture, you have this talent gravity. It's a big advantage. It gives you almost like 9 lives as a company when you have that level of talent and dedication and leadership, to kind of run the show.
This is one of the fascinating things to me, I think, about the sometimes, and I won't say geographical disadvantage, but like, sometimes people look at Europe and Australia and maybe some other countries as well and say there's this challenge with you're not close to the US where most of the companies are, and so your go-to-market's hard. But then you look at, out of Australia, it's like you have, Canva, you have Atlassian, you have Xero, like all of these super big product-led first, distribution winners, and they've all won on their product. Like it seems like there's something in the water there that, that just keeps it going. I don't know if there's like a compounding kind of advantage of these folks that are continuing to come out and start companies, but it's pretty amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Atlassian was really a pioneer here. I mean, I think there are a few others like New Relic that were early with the notion of, hey, we're just going to have people like discover our software on the internet and download it. But with Atlassian, the founders, they bootstrapped, and in Australia they couldn't afford to have like salespeople walking around the US, and so they just had a great product, and they figured some things out with SEO and online distribution, and what an amazing company. And that informed Blackbird Ventures. I mean, their fund one thesis was basically PLG. I mean, but that was 5 years before anyone else was thinking about that, and before that term had been coined. And so they actually invested in that same fund in like safety culture, which is kind of very similar, very early with kind of bottom up PLG. Yeah, I mean, there's trade-offs, right? There's advantages if you're in the Bay Area, but I think being in Australia for those companies kind of forced them to have an amazing product, win on ease of use, be more global with your outlook, it's worked out really well. I mean, I think there's great companies being hatched, in San Francisco right now for sure. But yeah, there's some that are in Australia. And I guess it's like, if you're going to be in Australia, maybe if you're looking for role models, maybe look a little bit more closely to, Atlassian and Canva than say Salesforce. So you want to kind of cater your approach to the strengths of your local ecosystem. But yeah, Australia and New Zealand as well with Xero and some other great companies. I mean, they've really developed amazing ecosystems that turn out to be really, really good at building product.
I have to be careful, actually. Yeah, I forgot Xero is in New Zealand, and sometimes I group those together. I need to need to remember that completely separate. But let's kind of move into the future and where we want to go. We talked a lot about AI as a natural tailwind for this business, but as you kind of put your galaxy brain on and think as big as you can go, like, what do you think Canva will be doing in the future, whether it's continue to push forward with AI and do different things? Is it expanding into a completely new market? Like, kind of just curious on, if you were to wave your magic wand and have a crystal ball, like what you would say. This is not the company, but this is you saying, hey, where do you think this might go?
Yeah, well, I think they're going to continue to keep it simple with, democratizing design. I think that they will be a little bit more geared towards companies and enterprises. And yeah, I think they have wins at their back, certainly around AI, but then just the world is increasingly living online, and it's like you think social media is saturated, and then TikTok pops up, and so as we spend more and more time online, I think we care more and more about how we look, how we're expressing ourselves, and so design tools just become more and more useful. So I think that they can continue to keep it simple and just benefit from the world. I don't know if the singularity is near, but as we kind of converge there into that, Kurzweilian, moment, probably the demand for the tools that Canva has go up.
Do you ever see a world where, Canva is beating out G Suite on the individual side?
Well, I don't have great data. I mean, Google doesn't break out a whole lot there.
Yeah.
I mean, Gmail still seems like a pretty formidable product, and I have no inside information here with Canva and their roadmap, but I don't think they're going to be going towards email or anything like that. So I think that they're not going to be unseating Gmail. I don't think the other Google Docs and Sheets. I don't think that stuff gets that much usage. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. So yeah, I think they could definitely be taking share there. So I'm not sure how much budget gets allocated to Google Docs, Google presentations, kind of across enterprises. But yeah, I think Canva can continue to probably is and will continue to take share there, and I think they'll probably take share from Office as well. I mean, I don't think power users of Excel are gonna cancel their Microsoft license and go to Canva. Like, probably the median use case, I think, is just that people are going to use more and more of these tools. And when we're talking about 10, 15, $20 a month per user, right, like I think there's going to be budget there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the bull case, and we've said all the great things about the business. But kind of what are the risks, right? Like, what are the things that keep you up at night thinking about Canva?
Well, this doesn't actually keep me up, but probably the thing, I think it's natural. Like, if you're kind of a third-party analyst, you think of competitors, and then the ones you've heard of or the household names. Like Microsoft, like Adobe. I think Adobe in particular has been coming after Canva. They released a product called Adobe Express that people would say has a lot of similarities to Canva. And Adobe does have a pretty big sales team, and so they have been trying to sell and kind of bundle it into organizations because Photoshop and Lightroom and these tools. It's not democratized, so it's not like Reddit didn't have hundreds of licenses for Photoshop, but they definitely had some. And so, like in this case with Reddit, Adobe, wanted to sell Adobe Express as kind of the Canva competitor that's also integrated into those existing Adobe products. But people in the case of Reddit were already using Canva. It was easier to use. People loved it. And for that average user, I don't think they really care if it's integrated into Photoshop or Lightroom or what have you. But yeah, I mean, credit where it's due. I mean, Adobe's an amazing company, and so certainly they are capable of stealing a little bit of the thunder of Canva, and Microsoft as well. It seems like it's a little bit less of a priority. The Microsoft PowerPoint franchise is intact. And I don't think they're too worried about Canva, although Canva probably is slowly taking share. And then startups, of course, are a threat for any successful established company. Thus far, I don't think there have been startups that have really taken significant share from Canva, but anything can happen, especially looking forward with AI. Like, ultimately, I do think that the biggest strength they have as a company is the team and the culture, because that's how you can execute at scale. Like, it's just so rare to be executing so well at scale. And so that comes from leadership, comes from team. And so sometimes when people are really successful at a young age, they get a little distracted. It hasn't happened thus far with the Canva founders. I mean, they're incredibly mission driven. So I don't think it's going to happen. I'm not losing sleep over it, but they have amazing wealth, all sorts of opportunities. It seems though that they are, they continue to be incredibly focused on Canva and very mission driven. So I don't lose sleep over that, but that probably should be the thing that people would like diligence the most closely. If you're considering investing, I would probably say, try to make sure that the leadership and the culture is intact. If it is, I think they're going to continue to be executing as well, if not better than any other scaled software company on the planet.
Last question before we wrap up here is, one thing actually we didn't address. We addressed AI, but in the context of images. But Sora came out, right? We have Runway ML is hosting like an AI video day or something, and it's there's all these stuff happening in video, which obviously is creative. Which could be a new era that Canva could go in and democratize, right? Because right now, I mean, I've tried Runway. It's still hard for me to figure it out. Versus, I could use Canva and open up and design like a wedding invitation or something, right? So, do you think that that's something that that they're experimenting with, or will take some meaningful steps with in the future?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. As part of their Magic Suite, they do have a video product, where you can text to video. I believe you upload 3 images. And it's going to kind of center on that, and then it'll create a video. And I'm sure they're working on it. And so, Sora is amazing. And so I don't expect Canva to all of a sudden like get better at that kind of core, AI innovation than OpenAI. But I do think Canva will stay on the cutting edge in terms of taking what's in the labs and then putting it in a compliant environment. And this might actually be a disadvantage for Canva because as a big company and now with a lot of big company customers, they have to be more measured in terms of what the capabilities they're offering. They're going to have to be, more attentive to compliance and have the guardrails. And so I think right now that's a strength and valuable, for them selling into the enterprise. But maybe they lose a little bit of connection with like the most cutting edge individual stuff where, these open source things and individual users will do crazy offensive things, right? But if you're too worried about restricting that, maybe you lose touch with like the most innovative. So there's a possibility that becomes a threat to them. But right now they do have a good video product, and I think they're going to continue to lean into that.
Yeah, the funniest thing is, back in March of 2024, all that time back, I remember Google was too woke to do AI, and oh my God, they're not shipping anything. It's like, nope. They were just shipping it in a compliant way. And when they did, sure, yes, they did make a mistake when they first shipped Gemini. But since then, that is it's a lights out product. They're incorporating it everywhere, and it's powered the business forward as well, and the stock forward. So I think, while some people may view that as a bear case, I think for Canva's case, it probably bodes well for the future. But just to wrap up, like from your side, Sandy, obviously you're angel investing, or not even angel, but you're investing now into early stage companies. How should people find you? What are you looking for? Just kind of plug yourself for a little bit here.
Sure, thank you. Anyone can email me at sandy@HorizonVC. You can find me on Twitter. So don't hesitate to reach out. And we love working at the earliest stages with product obsessed founders who want to build great software and change the world. A little bit like what Canva has done. We're particularly excited right now about AI. I think, there's been, technologies that have been overhyped in the past. We don't have to go to the details. And so I think there still are people who have skepticism, and I'm sure there's some overhyped AI. A big spreadsheet all of a sudden is like ML and that's AI, right? But wow, the real use cases we're seeing with AI, and Canva is an example where I think that's really AI, and it really is magical. And then we're seeing AI getting sold into like these laggard industries, like all of a sudden healthcare and manufacturing, and law firm. Law firms are like the worst group to sell into, but there's a bunch of great startups selling AI into the law firms. It's really exciting. So, we'd love to hear from people and learn from people as we're very excited about that.
Well, for me, this was personally a fun one, as after I think like a 10-year, 12-year journey of knowing each other, getting to do this on this platform. Thank you so much for doing the deep dive into Canva, for teaching me a lot of new things about the business, and congratulations on just an amazing investment, an amazing company that I'm sure you'll be fortunate to hold in the public markets one day for a very long time. So hope the listeners learned a lot, and reach out to Sandy if you have any further questions.
Thanks a lot for having me.